If you enjoy our content and think this is important material, the best compliment you can pay is by sharing this with your friends and family. This helps us out a lot. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We would love to hear from you. The Truth in My Days podcast is sponsored by the Truth in My Days ministry. Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello all. Today we have Sonia interviewing John about literary dependence and the synoptic problem. This is looking at the process by which the gospel authors went about writing the gospel books. Given that the gospel books are so similar, particularly Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it raises the questions such as, do they copy each other? Are the similarities due to the divine inspiration from the Holy Spirit? What do the evangelical scholars say about this? Is there something wrong with their approach? John will be looking to answer these questions and more. We're continuing from the previous episode today. We hope you enjoy.
Let me translate that. The picture we're being given by this apologist now is that the earliest evidence we have for the resurrection of Jesus is that a group of people who were not eyewitnesses of the risen Jesus, living in a city in the Hellenic world about 2 decades after Christ's death, insisted that Jesus was raised from the dead because they had been told that by another man who was himself not an eyewitness of the risen Jesus. And the gospel books just came later, and scholars are deconstructing them as we speak. This view, of course, plays exactly into the liberal reconstruction that posits Paul as the real inventor of Christianity. Liberal scholars have long argued that Jesus' original Jewish followers taught a very different view of Jesus from Paul's Hellenized God-man. They contended that Jesus was only a human being who was accepted by his followers as the Messiah, until Paul came along and, on the basis of nothing more than his own visions, invented the divine Jesus, resurrection, and all. This led to a power struggle that was eventually won by Paul's followers after Jesus' original Jewish followers were largely wiped out during the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70.
Who said that? Are you quoting somebody?
No, that's pretty much a summation of the teachings of many, many liberal scholars. This is pretty much par for the course. If you want a specific name, Dr. Shabir Ali will certainly say this. It's a mainstream view, probably a majority view. So in sum, then, this is what you get, folks. From literary dependence, Markan priority, late dating, mainstream textual criticism, Darwinism, the hashing of inerrancy, and evangelicals have been asleep at the switch, accepting these liberal paradigm assumptions, and the result then is the destruction of the credibility of Jesus and of Christianity, and we're rapidly moving that way. Now, of course, all of these are false, so we've talked about them, and articles are available on our website about all of these, but these liberal paradigm assumptions are essentially cancers that were injected into the church body by liberal scholarship, and really it's scholarship falsely so-called, because it's not really wrestling with the evidence. It's not saying, let's look at the evidence to figure out who Jesus is. It's more, well, we've already decided supernatural is impossible, so let's look at the evidence and see what's the best scenario we can cook up, assuming that Jesus is not God, didn't claim to be God, didn't rise from the dead, didn't do miracles. Our antibodies, they've utterly failed to stop these attacks so far. And I would say it's very much time to step up and not sit by idly and allow ourselves to be told these falsehoods and accept them regardless of who they're coming from. So to finish off, we're going to look at some clips from a debate that took place between the Muslim apologist Dr. Shabir Ali and Dr. Michael Licona back in the year 2016. And we're going to see how the acceptance of these kind of liberal presuppositions, Markan priority, late dating, and so on, how they are used by the opponents of the cause of Christ to undermine the case for Jesus and for the resurrection. In this particular case, the debate was on Jesus resurrected or rescued. Dr. Ali was arguing that Jesus did not actually die. He was taken up directly into heaven by God. So let's listen to a few parts of these and see how it plays out.
This is the recording from the YouTube video.
So we need to confront the fact that there is poetic and possibly legendary narratives in the Gospels themselves. And I'm delighted to be having this dialogue with Michael Kona, because if I was having this dialogue with someone else, I would be under tremendous strain to try to prove this very point. But Mike has actually detailed this in his book, The Resurrection of Jesus, copies of which are available outside, and I would encourage you to buy and study Mike's book. It's quite a hefty volume and a good resource for many things pertaining to the resurrection of Jesus. I will be using it for many years hence. Now, Mike says on page 186, we may also be reading poetic language or legend at certain points. Now, he offers two examples of this. One is where the four Gospels each have it that the women visiting the tomb find it empty, and they meet angels who explain to them what this is all about. Jesus is not here. He has been raised. They see the place where they laid him, and so on. So that's one example.
This is the end of the recording from the YouTube video.
Now, it's interesting here that Shabir Ali actually expresses his gratitude for Michael Lacona's book that we mentioned before, and saying that he would be using his books. I would find it problematic if Muslims who were not coming to Christ but attacking the truth of the resurrection found my books useful to do that. But he finds it useful here. He's appealing to the part in which Lacona tells us that there's poetry and legends in the gospel books. And he goes to town on that, and it's not that surprising. Once you put in this idea, there's really no limits on that. He cites some scholars that will tell you that the so-called beloved disciple in the Gospel according to John is not the Apostle John, may not even be an actual historical character, but simply a fictitious narrative representing the best kind of disciple you can have.
This is the recording from the YouTube video.
Now, the scholars try to reconstruct the sources and see the relationships between these Gospels. I've already intimated that Mark, Matthew, and Luke are derived from Mark. And in fact, Mike acknowledges this in his book. And to a certain extent, he did that in his opening speeches as well. So we're on good ground here. As I said, I'm happy to be having this dialogue with Mike. We're mostly on the same page so far. But what this means is that, as Mike says, if we want to understand Matthew and Luke, we have to see them in comparison with Mark. And we can see how they develop and change the story with Mark in front of them and now what they're writing.
This is the end of the recording from the YouTube video.
Here we see Dr. Ali accepting Markan priority and literary dependence, appealing to these for his case, and Dr. Lacona, of course, is in agreement with these things.
This is the recording from the YouTube video.
Mike says that the Gospels were written 3 to 7 decades after Jesus, so that's about 60 to 100. I've given approximate dates for these Gospels based on that large schema, and what I know from scholars more generally, that Mark was written around 65, Matthew and Luke around 85, and John's Gospel by 100 CE. So now, you see the situation that Jesus came and he left. And then for several decades, for 3 decades at least, the stories about Jesus were being told orally and passed on and elaborated upon and preached about until eventually they were put into writing. So naturally those stories were developed, they evolved in several directions, and some of them picked up greater speed than others, and eventually these writers are each making selections from that wider pool of oral tradition and including that. Now, the fact that a gospel is late does not mean that all of it is false, because this gospel, for example, could be borrowing an oral tradition which was still being circulated all around and eventually comes in the gospel according to John. So what we do, what scholars do, is they try to retrace every single episode to their origins and see how the stories developed and changed and try to decipher the difference between the original and the later narratives. I eliminated John from this picture for so that we can simplify the diagram, and I can include more complex items. So it's not getting easier for you. I'm sorry about this, but this is standard. This is what they teach in an introductory course on the New Testament in universities in America. And now I want to use the pre-Markan narrative. That's where Mark would have got his information from. So if we saw that Matthew and Luke were improving upon Mark, did Mark improve upon his source as well? And the answer to that is yes. And scholars like Wolfgang Pannenberg have said that where Mark has it, that the women visited the tomb and the angel spoke to them and said, go tell his disciples that he's going before them to meet them in Galilee. According to Pannenberg, Mark chapter 16, verse 7, that says this is not original to the story. The pre-Markan narrative did not have this. Neither did it have Mark 14:28. You can look that up on your own time. I'm just mentioning that for completeness. But both of them go to indicate that Jesus is going to Galilee and he's going to appear to his disciples. That was not in the pre-Markan story. So Mark himself has added that to the narrative. So you see that the story is developing as we go from time to time. I haven't given the dates for the pre-Markan narrative because nobody knows when it was actually composed or whether it was oral or written. Now, another source that Mike mentioned in his opening presentation is the Q document. Matthew and Luke not only wrote based on Mark, but they had another important document, a document which scholars call Q. I didn't show it as a scroll because it is not certain absolutely that this was a written document, though many scholars believe it was a written document.
This is the end of the recording from the YouTube video.
So what have we seen in this part? We've seen Shabir saying that the gospel books were written 3 to 7 decades after the fact. It's 30 to 70 years, and telling us that Licona agrees with this. He claims that the books were written on the basis of oral traditions, passed along from mouth to mouth and varying in different communities. In the Gospel according to John, he tells us, well, it might have some truth to it because it's based on a collection of oral traditions. So you see, magically the concept of the actual apostle giving his eyewitness testimony is gone. Then, as he wants to make the case, he wants to eliminate John as a source just for convenience, but we see evangelical scholars telling us in debates with Bart Ehrman, for example, that, well, yes, John was not meant to be historical, more of a parable or wisdom literature. We saw here the appeal to sources. Literary dependence allows you to go to Q, which he does, pointing out that Licona approves of Q, the idea. Going to Mark as the other source. And hey, once you have this kind of literary dependence, why stop there? He'll tell us that there's a pre-Markan source and cite another scholar, Wolfhard Pannenberg, telling us that, Mark doesn't just end at 16:8. Actually, 16:7 is not part of the original, and 14:28. So Jesus never predicted that he would go to Galilee, never instructed his disciples to go there. It's amazing what you can do to the gospel books if you accept these kind of ideas. He accepts the idea that Paul wrote first, and he made up. Essentially, he's hinting that he made up this stuff about the resurrection and the importance of the death of Jesus and influenced the gospel writers. And you will see also that we does throughout is cite scholar after scholar and say, well, this scholar says this scholar says that. This is not a legitimate way to argue. If you would watch my opening statement in my debate with Shabir Ali, it's on our website, on YouTube, you'll see what we really have to do. But unfortunately, Shabir takes advantage of what we do see in evangelical circles, an uncritical acceptance of the claims of scholars and no real examination, direct examination of the evidence. So this is just one little taste of how the case for Christ, for Christianity, for the resurrection of Jesus, the reliability of the gospel books is really being taken down by these kind of liberal paradigm assumptions.
Well, thank you, John. There aren't many people who would expose the mainstream scholars, but you have, and I look forward to hearing your future programs about related matters such as the creed and other things that we've discussed here.
Yeah, I think we also have to talk about how we got into this situation. But for now, thank you, Sonia, for joining us for this interview, and we'll talk to you again on another program.
Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. If you like our content, please share this information with family and friends. It helps us a lot. We also would love to hear from you. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by searching Truth in My Days as one word again. Truth in My Days as one word. No spaces in between. Or reach us by email at info@truthinmydays.com. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com. Thank you.